On This Week in Enterprise Tech, are you getting the broadband speeds you paid for? Congress gives away our privacy with CISA, and it's a spooky episode of Twiat with startup horror stories. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 164, recorded October 30th, 2015, Karma and ITUS, Startup Growing Pains. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Simple and fast cloud hosting built for developers. Deploy an SSD cloud server in 55 seconds. Try it today for free. Visit DigitalOcean.com, and once you sign up, be sure to enter the promo code TWIET, T-W-I-E-T, in the billing section for a $10 credit. Welcome to Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But of course, I'm not guiding you by myself. I've got my spectacular, my fabulous, my fantabulous, and yeah, that's a word, co-hosts, starting with Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, you're looking a little tired. I think weren't you climbing lava rocks and installing Internet of Things on another island yesterday?
Yes, I was. We had a production mesh network that has, shall we say, not lived up to expectations. So we were replacing it with more of my connectivity through cellular modems. And unfortunately, some of the installs were on the side of hillsides, covered in lava rock. And as carrying some stuff up, I managed to take a spill and really meatballed part of my feet. Ouch. Love it, love it, love it.
Well, folks, that's how dedicated we are. Neither rain nor sleet, nor lack of sleep, nor ripping up our body parts with lava rocks will keep us from delivering the enterprise news. Speaking of dedication, there is no man more dedicated to the cause than Mr. Curtis Franklin from Information Week Radio. Curtis, thank you for coming back. You've got some beautiful weather out there. Are things actually nice on the right coast?
Oh, Padre, we're well into the cool, crisp fall here in northern Florida. It's only about 84 today, and so people have cozy fires in their fireplaces, and students are walking around in mucklucks and sweaters. But this is the reason we like living here in the swamp.
Well, gentlemen, it's great to have you on board, but let's stop talking about the weather and personal injury. We've got a fantastic episode. We will be giving you a Halloween-themed episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. That's right. It's the nightmares of being a startup. What happens when your hardware doesn't go quite right? But before we do that, let's go ahead and jump into the blips. Well, if you live in New York, you may not be getting the broadband that you paid for. Cablevision, Verizon, and Time Warner Cable are under investigation for charges that they are not providing the broadband speeds that customers in New York have paid for. The investigation was launched by New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman after a preliminary investigation found cause for concern. Though underperforming broadband speeds have been around since the creation of broadband service, the Attorney General claims that in the case of New York and those three ISPs, the difference between promised speeds and what customers actually receive is big enough to trigger charges of deceptive advertising. Additionally, a letter from Tim Wu, Senior Enforcement Counsel and a special advisor for the Attorney General, claims that the slowdowns New York locals have experienced stem from issues that are well within the ISP's control to correct. Specifically, their interconnection agreements negate any extra speed that consumers pay for. Luckily, with the passing of net neutrality legislation, the New York Attorney General now has the power to demand the details of those interconnection agreements to see if the ISPs have provisioned enough bandwidth to support the services that they're selling. Cablevision, Verizon, and Time Warner have all released statements that they will cooperate with the investigation and that they are confident that they are providing the services that were paid for.
It's okay to hack phones, cars, games, and tractors. The Librarian of Congress, David S. Mayo, against the wishes of automakers, has adopted a DMCA exemption that will allow the inspection and lawful modification of software governing the operation of vehicles. The ruling was part of the triannual rulemaking proceeding to limit the excessive scope of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act's Section 1201. The automotive software exemption takes effect in 12 months to give the DOT and the EPA time to consider how the exemption might affect regulations enforced by those agencies. New rules were also released regarding mobile devices, video games, and videos on CDs and Blu-ray discs. The fight over the copyright rules are far from over. Don't believe me? Hey, just wait 3 years.
The European Union Parliament votes to shield Mr. Snowden. But are you sure you guys really want him? In a narrow margin of 285 to 281, the EU Parliament has voted to drop any charges against Edward Snowden and to grant him protection against extradition and rendition by third parties. What should be noted is this is a non-binding decision, and only time will tell whether Europe really is going to become a safe haven for our most famous traitor and whistleblower currently hiding out in Russia. To our European cousins, are you sure you really want him?
Well, hey, the man in the middle attack, known as a Stingray, is back in the news, this time with voice. Last year, as the use of Stingray intercept tools became common knowledge, privacy advocates were understandably up at arms over the warrantless use of communication tapping devices. At the time, law enforcement agencies using the devices were mum about their capabilities because of a non-disclosure agreement that they signed with federal authorities. But the argument was made that warrants were not required for the use of Stingrays because they only captured metadata. Well, in a newly released cache of documents, it has been revealed that Stingrays, as has long been suspected, can intercept voice and data communication in real time. If that is the case, then the warrantless use of Stingrays is in violation of Title III of federal wiretapping law. Maybe. The released documents also included a provision that shows that law enforcement believed they had the use of real-time capture of communications without a warrant in quote-unquote exceptional circumstances, though it does nothing to define exactly what exceptional circumstances might mean. To add to the morass that are Stingrays, their use typically causes major communication disruption and collects data from all cells in the affected area, not just the intended target. In the meantime, us normal folk will just have to watch our service levels on our phones. As local law enforcement is the most prolific user of these devices, if you drop to 2G in an area where you normally get full bars, chances are someone is listening, maybe illegally.
IBM just bought the weather company, that is. IBM this week announced plans to acquire several pieces of the weather company's assets and use them in a foundation for its Internet of Things cognitive computing efforts and as part of the company's Insight cloud services that were announced earlier in the week. IBM essentially purchased all the forecasting, analytics, and data assets and also all of the brands and applications except for the Weather Channel television property. IBM noted that weather is one of the single largest swing factors in business performance, impacting 1/3 of the world's GDP. IBM announced new bundled data sets from IBM and the weather company, customized for specific industries and available on the IBM cloud. Data feeds include real-time alerts for severe weather, seasonal forecasts, and other information. IBM has not yet announced whether they're going to accept responsibility for that nasty thunderstorm that took out your cousin's wedding at the zoo.
Google to merge Chrome OS into Android, to which I say, about time. It's been a while since Google has tried to convince the world that the minimalist platforms like Chromebooks and Chromeboxes are what we should be using. But alas, I've not really seen them outside of experiments. However, Android is another matter, so in a move to match Redmond's One OS to rule them all, Google is now talking about merging the Android and Chrome OS platforms together. Hopefully, it'll become a universal app platform with compatibility between both the mobile and the desktop. Perhaps Google's on the right track.
Surprise! Generic top-level domains are really generic. Remember when the generic top-level domains were to kick off a new gold rush of business-friendly names on the internet? The theory was sound. The traditional .com domain had become crowded, with very few businesses able to get the names that they wanted without paying an exorbitant amount of money to do so. The .whatever domains were to give us all that new internet smell on a whole new range of addresses that would also decrease the incentive to camp on .com. Well, it was a good theory, but in practice, not so much. ICANN, the governing body for domains, is dramatically dropping its profit expectations from GTLDs in 2015 by over half. Their draft 2016 budget predicts $300,000 from new GTLD registrations, which is down by 75% from expectations in 2015. More telling is the 75% non-renewal rate for the new domains and the plummeting interest by registries in hosting GTLDs. To put it all in perspective, ICANN forecasted 33 million GTLD registrations in 2015. Thus far, they have 4.5 million. It seems that on the internet, like in the real world, it's all about location, location.com. Well, that does it for the blips. Let's go ahead and jump into the Enterprise Bite. Now, there is really one that we need to talk about. And I know privacy people get a little bit jumpy, non-privacy people get a little bit sick that we cover these stories all the time, but this is actually a big one. Yesterday, CISA, or whatever you want to call it, the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act was passed. It's now heading into a joint session so that the House and the Senate can figure out exactly what bill they want to send to the president, where it is expected it will be signed. Now, this really flew under the radar for most enterprise people, for most networking people, but I think the best way to sum it up is to say that this is essentially the exact same bill that was rejected last year, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, CISPA. It was proposed 2 years ago, and it was shot down because of a massive outcry that it was just a bad law that wouldn't do anything it was intended to do. Now, what does CISA do? The DHS will create a portal for receiving threat information from businesses. This threat information includes all customer data. Now, threat information can be distributed to businesses after customer data not pertaining to a particular threat is removed, but those businesses will be required by law to submit their information to the portal. There is no opting out. This allows any of the major government agencies, the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, etc., to access raw data. Now, CISA runs for 10 years, after which point it will be voted on again. That this was up from the 4 and 6 years that was originally proposed. So it's strange that the security, the networking community hasn't really jumped on this. Chee, how has it been possible for CISA to fly under the radar for so long?
Well, CISA really hasn't been discussed out in the open yet, or at least I haven't seen a ton of conversation about it. However, it's been discussed ad nauseum in cybersecurity forums. People like the FBI InfraGard group has been talking about it for years and taking a good hard look at the pros and cons. There is a lot of people saying we need to cooperate because we're just not making headway against about putting some of these hackers in jail. But there's been a lot of concern about, can it be taken too far, too easily? And I think that's one of the biggest concerns in the cybersecurity community that I've been hearing lately.
Curtis, let's get really basic here because it's too easy to knee-jerk on these big issues. I mean, this is one of these things that's always going to divide large parts of the security community. There are many of us who say, look, there has to be some sort of mechanism for the government to be able to get information, to do threat analysis. Okay, as a system administrator, I will give that. But then there is also the privacy group that's saying you need to respect the Constitution of the United States. You need to respect what is fair and reasonable search. Why are people upset with this law?
I think there are several reasons that people are upset, Padre, and you can break them down into several points. The reach, transparency, and security. Let's do all of those. First, reach. This really does expand dramatically the type of data that can be requested and the parties from whom it can be requested. Basically, when you get down to it, any government agency can request any data from any organization for any reason. That is a dramatic increase in what we have seen to this point. There's also the notion of transparency. They can do this without us, either directly or through our proxies in the press and interest groups, being able to find out what they're asking for and whether it's been useful. There's the whole notion of security. I hate to say it, but the government agencies that have collected vast amounts of information have shown themselves to be poor stewards of that information. Not talking about whether there was the intent to be a good steward or not. It just hasn't worked out well. So you throw all of these together, add the final thing, which I would say is mission creep. We always hear something like this justified on the basis of, well, it's only the groups that are directly involved with terrorism, and they'll only ask for very specific information for very specific security type operations. And yet we know, because of what we've seen in other circumstances, that it will be a relatively short time before the FBI and even, I would guess, the IRS is asking for information from banks, from communications companies, from anyone they can think of, to see just how much big data they can get and analyze to capture as many people who are trying to skate around rules, who are breaking the law, as possible. The question that we ultimately must answer is whether we can justify any activity at all as long as it catches one lawbreaker. You know, back in the 60s during the Cold War, we looked at the Soviet Union and decided that they had gone much further than we were willing to go in the range of surveillance to keep people following the rules of their society. I look at what we're doing, and it frankly makes what the Soviet Union had in place look like a game of telephone in somebody's second grade class.
Chee, let me ask you this. Who does this defend? Because when you look at some of the big breaches of the past year, let's look at Sony, let's look at Target, let's look at OPM, I don't see how sharing of business information, customer databases, would have stopped any of those hacks. And even though those attacks are directly mentioned in the advocacy supporting this bill. So who is this designed to protect?
Actually, I think what we're talking about isn't so much databases. When I hear the raw data section of the CISA, I'm hearing more things like big InfiniBand servers or things like, basically the systems like what the Internal Revenue Service, the tax people in Canada did. They're actually recording all ingress and egress from their major networks. And that's when they had that breach, they were able to go and find the kid that breached them very, very quickly and was able to shut the doors quickly. I think when you start hearing about raw data, I think that's what they're talking more about, not necessarily about the databases. Obviously, one of the things that a lot of investigative agencies will want to have, they do want access to those databases because it's all about picking up grains of sand. If you can correlate little pieces of information and try and track where those digital footsteps are going, that's how you make a case. It's collecting grains of sand to try and make your proverbial beach. So yeah, CISA's got some real promise for law enforcement agencies. However, there is just all kinds of places where I'm personally not sure there's enough controls, and to have the proverbial, FBI or NSA hacker being able to go and do lookups willy-nilly without having a warrant really does bother me. We need to find more of a balance, and I don't think CISA has enough balance. They certainly are going down a good road to be able to protect us against ourselves, in the case of Sony and Target and so forth. But No, no. I think there needs to be more controls to prevent someone from going crazy and getting a little too willy-nilly with the free access to information to really make this compliant with what the general public would like to have.
We've got CR1 in the chat room who is, and this is why I love our Twit Army audience. He says, I prefer the good old days where the government had to hold your head underwater to get that information. I miss the good old person to thug interaction. But, you know, non-funny is Emily the Strange, who's saying it looks like it has to pass the House. Unfortunately, it already has. You see, the House has the Protecting Cyber Networks Act. That's the PCNA, and the National Cybersecurity Protection Advancement Act. That's actually the same bill, two bills that are, that's the CISA that just passed the Senate. So now the House and the Senate have to meet to hammer out any differences between the two bills that they passed. They will pass that on to the president, and again, it will most likely be signed. Now, here's the thing for me. A couple of senators, including Senator Al Franken, tried to add a few amendments to the bill that were completely shot down. The one that I really wanted to see was the removal of the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act exemption. That means that U.S. citizens can't request cyber threat indicators and defensive measures provided by the federal government under the act. That means there's no way for us to know how the information is being used. There's no way for us to check, to put a check on the power of having this massive database of threat indication data. That already that's a huge red flag. When you are exempting an entire program from a FOIA request, it means you're essentially saying we know that this is not going to survive public scrutiny. That's a big no-no. The other one was the attempt, and this is the one that Al Franken did. He tried to define, make them define what a cybersecurity threat and a cyber threat indicator. Those are the two trigger terms inside the bill that essentially allow the federal government to do anything. If they can justify either of those as being a cybersecurity threat, a cyber threat indicator, then that means they have full access to the database that's being compiled. Again, like you, Cheebert, I would be okay with a database like this existing if there were very strong controls of when it could and could not be used. We have a very long-standing tradition in this country of not allowing prosecutors, of not allowing investigators to go on fishing trips. You can't just stake somebody out because you know in your gut that they're doing something wrong or you think they're doing something wrong. You actually have to have cause, and that's one of the great things about our law. To take that away just because we're in the digital realm, that does not sit with me. I want to throw something back over to you, Curtis, and that is this. This last year has seen some incredibly embarrassing breaches for the United States government's data network. And I'm not just talking about OPM. I'm talking about a network that seems to be at least a decade, if not more, behind the security standards of just enterprise, of big business. Now we're talking about creating a portal. Remember, DHS will create a portal, a publicly accessible portal available to businesses who submit information to the portal that will then be accessible by all government agencies and by all companies that are submitting to the portal. I don't know about you, but I cannot think of something more insecure than putting the government in charge of a portal that has access to all that information and then counting on them to defend it against people who shouldn't have access to it.
It's almost like they never heard of China. And let's be clear. Look at the list of nations and nation states that would very much like to have access to what we know and what we don't know. They have some very talented people working on getting inside our government resources. And they've been really pretty darn successful so far. I don't see that this has any significantly better chance of success than what we've seen before. This is a knee-jerk control mechanism on the part of Congress that is getting ready to go into an election cycle and has members who want desperately to be able to trumpet just how tough they are on cyber terrorists and just how willing they are to give law enforcement every tool they might possibly need without regard for what the consequences might be. I can honestly think of absolutely nothing good to say about this particular bill. Are there useful things in there for law enforcement? Why, sure. But that's not the only thing that should matter in considering bills of this sort. I think the consequences to individuals and to businesses are going to be extreme and frequent once this is passed.
Chee, I said that Curtis would have the last throw in. I lied because I want to give it to you because you actually have some information about a program that has already been running that's not mandatory, that has actually done quite well.
Yeah, the FBI has been running a program called InfraGuard, and to get in, you just have to let them do a light security check on you to make sure you're not a terrorist or something like that. But it is mostly organizations of corporations and education and so forth. I guess you could call it almost a club, and it's definitely an opt-in program, and the FBI kind of lightly steers it, but it's run by the people that run the organization, the actual participants. And the group sends in reports. It sends in risk analysis. I've actually written a few reports for it. And it allows us to share it. It allows civilians to get reports that are normally for official use only, because it kind of brings us into the inner, maybe the outer circle. And InfraGuard's done a really, really good job of educating and disseminating information. We get some really interesting warnings, sometimes a full week before they become public. And as a result, it gives us a better chance to make sure that the firewalls are updated, that we've got we can actually throw ACLs into our upstream routers before it becomes public. It's a really, really useful thing. And again, it is opt-in. I would love to see the InfraGuard program become, something more. It hasn't been able to grow as much as I think it would like to, mostly because of the lack of bodies to help run it. There's a lot of information to disseminate, and there's a lot of work needed to clear the people that are joining the organization. And so far, I've seen a lot of really good things happening about it. And because it is an opt-in program, the members tend to be quite willing to share amongst each other, because it's a sharing process rather than being slammed over the head and saying, you must do this.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for that discussion. It's an important issue for us who work in the enterprise, who work in network, who work in security. I will say this. I don't want to tell you which way you should feel. We've presented some information. Hopefully, you will make your own decisions about whether or not this is a good law or a bad one. I will say that because these three bills are now being reconciled, this is the time to write your representative one way or another. If you support it, if you don't support it, let them know. This is a community who, is going to be affected by this law. And if you have strong emotions, strong feelings one way or another, it's time to speak your word or forever hold your security. Now, when we come back, it's the spooky time of Twyat. You wanted to know exactly what goes on when you've got a startup, when you've got that new brilliant idea, that new product that's going to change your industry or maybe even the world. Well, we've got two experts here who are going to tell us about, the challenges they faced in bringing their product to market. We've got Daniel Ayoub from ITUS Networks and Stephen Van Well from Karma, who are going to give us, their unique perspective of what it takes to bring a product to market. But before we do that, let's go ahead and thank the sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and it's DigitalOcean. Now, whether you're an experienced code warrior, a developer, or someone just getting started, you're going to need flexible, reliable, and affordable hosting. DigitalOcean can give you just that with Droplets. These are virtual private servers that can be customized and deployed quickly to host your websites, your web apps, your production applications, your personal projects, virtual desktops, and pretty much anything else that you can think of, all with full root access. Our DigitalOcean is built for developers by developers, and it's used by over 400,000 of them, including me. What I love about DigitalOcean is that they give me a one-click install so I can install things like Django, Docker, Drupal, LAMP, GitLab, MediaWiki, Node.js, WordPress, Ghost, Magento, OwnCloud, Ruby on Rails, and more. I get to choose my OS. Do I want to use Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, CoreOS, FreeBSD? I can manage all of my droplets from a streamlined control panel or a simple API, and I can grow them as needed. For example, when I just first deploy something, maybe I want to beta it. I want to give it to 5, 10, 20, 100 people to see how it will handle real-world traffic, to see if my security, my coding was done properly. From there, it's just a click of a button, and I can go live. I can go worldwide. That's the power of DigitalOcean. All their servers are built on hex-core machines with dedicated ECC memory and RAID SSD storage. They can have up to 20 CPUs, 64 gigabytes of memory, and 640 gigabytes of SSD space. They're highly scalable to meet the demands of your rapidly growing application or business, and they give you things like auto backups and snapshots, so they take care of all that scut work that you don't want to. You can easily clone and deploy and resize your droplets as they go. They give you 99.99% uptime, gigabit speeds, and they'll even give you dedicated IPs if you need them. You've got web console access with HTML5 plus SSH, SFTP, and KVM VNC for virtual desktops. And my personal favorite is an extremely active community. These are real people who are actually using the service, who are participating in forums and Q&As. If you ever have a problem, you can speak to a person who's gone through the exact same development issues, through the exact same growing pains. That's what makes DigitalOcean different. It's not just a service, it's a community. It's so easy to get started. You can deploy your SSD cloud server in as little as 55 seconds. Folks, I really don't see any other reasons not to try DigitalOcean. They've got incredibly affordable and straightforward pricing, with servers starting at just $5 per month. There's also hourly pricing available if you want to test a new distribution, starting at less than a penny an hour. But we're going to make it easy for you to get started today and deploy your own SSD cloud server for free. Visit DigitalOcean.com and create an account. Once you confirm your email and account information, go to the billing section and enter the promo code TWIET, T-W-I-E-T, for a free $10 credit. That's plenty to get started and explore what DigitalOcean can do for you. That's DigitalOcean.com, DigitalOcean.com. And once you sign up, enter the code TWIET in the billing section for a $10 credit. And we thank DigitalOcean for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get straight to it. My favorite part of each episode where we bring in the experts. We welcome to the show, back to the show, actually, Mr. Daniel Ayoub from ITUS Networks. Daniel, it's always great to see you. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here, Padre.
And coming in from New York is Mr. Stephen Van Well. He is the CEO and co-founder of Karma. Stephen, thank you very much for coming on to Twiet.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, gentlemen, the reason why we've asked both of you on is because you can give us a very unique perspective of what it takes to bring a product to market. Now, this is one of these things that it's sort of like the rite of passage nowadays. If you're in tech, you create a startup, and then you bring something to market, and you make billions of dollars, and you buy yachts and do philanthropy. That's sort of the dream, right? But in between having the idea and buying the big yachts, there's a lot of work, and both of you have had to go through some heavy nightmare challenges. Let me break it down really quickly. Let's start with Daniel. Daniel, so we've had you on before.
Yes.
You've talked about the Guardian, about the Shield.
Yep.
It's a device that gave us enterprise class processors inside of a consumer level device. And see, Brian has his, I have mine.
Yeah.
Well, you had an interesting campaign. You kickstarted this, and then you had to go through manufacturing. Can you describe what the process was like?
Yeah, it was a very interesting process. Kickstarter in general, I think, is like you said, a rite of passage, so to speak. And I think there are a lot of challenges that come with it. But a product like this is not easy to get designed, first of all. It wasn't easy to get manufactured. So we actually wound up looking around quite a bit. We found somebody that we thought was good. And long story short, it took a lot longer to get the product into the hands of our customers than we really would have liked.
Right. And in fact, this is one of the things that I see a lot with engineers who typically work for large companies and are used to being able to say, okay, this is how it has to be designed, and then it gets sent off to the procurement department. They take care of all the nitty-gritty, all the logistics, and you get finished product. And it sounds like it should be really easy, right? You ship it to whatever factory is going to create them, and you get back finished product. As you found, that's not really how it works.
No. There's a lot of things that go on in between the stage of putting an idea on a whiteboard and actually getting a finished product in your hand. The process takes a lot longer than you expect. There's always going to be hiccups that come up. We found that just in general, the design process had some challenges. We wound up going through multiple iterations of the board before we finally got one that we thought was good enough to go into production with, and then hit some delays when it came to manufacturing and such. But you learn from every experience, and I think in the long run, it makes the business stronger if you come through it on the other end, because you know what to do and what not to do next time, right?
Well, but see, the interesting thing is you knew how these devices come together. So you had a head start over someone who just has an idea in a garage. And you understand the manufacturing processes. You had some connections. You knew who you would have to get in touch with. And even then, there were some costly overruns. There were some misunderstandings. I would even say, I don't know how much you can say without getting into legal issues. I would say at one point, you were kind of held hostage by a manufacturer who just wanted more money than they had been agreed upon.
Yeah, it was an interesting situation where we had been given a quote, we agreed to the purchase order, and then a week or two before manufacturing, prices were, let's say, adjusted in a unfavorable way. So it kind of put us in a situation where, what are you going to do? You've already commit to all your customers, and it's unfortunate, but sometimes I feel that probably being a small company, you get taken advantage of, whereas a larger company maybe wouldn't. They wouldn't try those kind of things with them. So it kind of comes with the territory, but you move forward. And the important thing was to get the product into the hands of our customers. For me, that was the hardest part. Was you've made a commitment to somebody. You want to make sure that those people are happy and that they receive what they've signed up for. So that part I took very seriously, and for me, that I think was the hardest part of the entire ordeal. In addition to dealing with all of the challenges, was having to face all the customers and backers and folks
Right.
that really put faith into you and believed in what you were doing. So.
Let's hold off on that, because I do want to bring in Stephen on this, because he has some incredible experiences with this exact thing happening. Now, we should note, your production was happening in the United States, so that's one level of difficulty. Stephen, your production was overseas. So that's a further level of trial and error and frustration. There was a great Forbes article that was written about what you had to do to get product to market. Now, the people who may not know what Karma is, I love this company. I have a Karma Classic. I have one of the original devices that came out. And the idea is having a hotspot that it's kind of community oriented. You want people to share your Karma. You want people to share your hotspot. You came out with a new device, the Karma Go, which was much anticipated. I believe you sold like 20,000 of the original units, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and then you got this Karma Go, and like companies are supposed to, you came up with a design. It was brilliant. You sent it off to an Asian manufacturer, an Asian factory, which sounds so commonplace. I mean, that's what Apple does. That's what Microsoft does. They give the specs, and then it comes back, it's done, you open the boxes. Tell me about your experience.
Well, from the very beginning, I think the most important thing is to realize that if you spec something and you don't take into account every tiny little detail, they will not take that to the next level. And to give you an example, the first time that we got a version back from our engineers, we didn't specify that once the device was plugged in, it should actually go on. Really simple, basic ideas. But it's not that the factory or the engineers weren't capable of actually making that happen, but it wasn't spec'd out. So if you look at how companies like Apple can manufacture super high quality hardware, it's because their specs and their PRDs are hundreds, if not thousands of pages. And I think that's like our biggest lesson in the early days, was that if we don't specify down to every interaction, every detail, how it should work, you won't get your product back the way you think you'll get it back. And with China, with South Korea, both of the countries that we did business with, time zones is a big challenge. And even thinking about how to iterate on things you get back, there sometimes is a 24 to 48 hours delay into like one tiny little update. And while you're getting the products into the hands of your customers, while you're pushing to get that product ready for market, that causes a bit of nightmares, I can tell you that.
I will say this, you pointed out at Apple, because Apple actually is a pretty good example of a company that does well overseas. But I know for a fact that they have teams, they have individuals who are responsible for essentially camping at the factory. They will send teams that will be there at all times. They're always doing quality control. They will do a final sign-off before it goes into full production. And they're responsible for having that unit in exactly the form that Apple corporate wants before it hits the assembly line. What you said, Daniel, earlier was that, I think this plays into the same idea. Apple deals in millions of units. And so they've got a lot of power. I mean, they can say, no, we won't sign off on this until you fix this, and this is your fault. Both you and Stephen, you as well. It may sound like a lot if you're saying, I need you to build 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 units, but to many of these factories, that's a small order. That's a one-off order. Yeah. So you don't get the same gravitas.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. That's exactly right. When you're a small company that they've never heard of, a lot of times you go to them and you say, okay, what's the minimum order quantity? And maybe it'd be 500 or 1,000 pieces or whatever it may be. The reality of it is that's not interesting to a lot of those manufacturers when you're talking about those kind of volumes. And starting out, it's almost as though you have to sometimes, for us, first of all, we had to find manufacturers that were capable of designing this or actually manufacturing it, because the size and the form factor was so small that you needed certain types of machines to be able to do the placement. So some of the lower cost manufacturers, it just wasn't possible. But yeah, I mean, we've basically, there's a lot of very interesting things that kind of have come out of it, but that was one of the big challenges we had, I think, early on.
And Stephen, Karma is, I'd say you're past the startup stage. You have started up, you've got popularity, you've got support, and I remember reading your comment section when you were going through the Karma Go saga.
Yeah.
The support, the community support, is a two-sided sword. It's a double-edged sword here, because the same people who were ultra loyal and ultra fanatical were also the ones who were most disappointed when you were going through the trials and the tribulations. How did that hit you?
Yeah, I think what for us was the most important thing is try to be incredibly transparent towards our customers. And while you're in this process of being delayed, transparency often is the most complicated thing, because sometimes there really is no news. And while you want to update your customers, even the team here in New York, we want to make sure that people know what's going on. But sometimes there simply is no news. So while no news is not piling up, finally we got to a point where there was news. Finally, we got to a point where we could tell people, not the good news, but actually that we were delayed with yet another 4 to unknown amount of weeks. And I think the first thing that happened is we got over close to 1,000 comments on that blog post. And 1,000 comments, I would say, on any post is amazing. But if 999 of them are negative towards the persons that work here, towards the team, the product, I think the most challenging thing is to keep morale up and to make sure that everyone still believes in the product. And what we saw over the course of the following weeks is when we got more news, when we got more insights into when the product would actually be ready, it went down to 600 negative comments, 400, 220. And at some point, the numbers went up, but they were all positive. So I think the most important thing as a startup, and I think we're very much still in a startup stage, making sure that you can tell your customers what's going on without making up a story. And while at the same time realizing that sometimes sharing not so good news will get you hundreds of negative comments. Sometimes that's the best thing to do. And as a startup, I think you sort of have to deal with those customers. And we have a great customer support team. We have a great team on social media that, again, try to be transparent. And it's not fun to read that thousands of people are angry at you trying to actually get the product into their hands. But it's also something that you have to understand, because people spend money. Even if it's $10, people spend money on your product and they want the product to be ready. And slowly transforming these negative comments into people that are promoting and sharing discount codes and referral codes for Karma. That has been, I think, the biggest challenge, and at the same time the biggest achievement for everyone that was involved.
That's Stephen, thank you very much for that. That's fantastic. I think that gives us a very good snapshot of it's a different kind of entrepreneur. This is not a startup from even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, where a startup got a product, and once the product was released into the market, that's when people would start commenting. Now, the standard is, as a startup, you raise buzz, you gauge interest, then you build product. And so all that entire time, you're building up community, which means that these are going to be the people who are invested. And one way or another, invested people can be very happy or very annoyed. Daniel, you hit this because, you, like Stephen, you tried to give your backers as much information as possible, even if the information was very annoying, even if it was very disappointing, because your deadlines kept getting pushed back and back. You had your manufacturer who was just not playing nicely, who was extorting more money for the same build, and you had to tell your backers, look, this is what was promised to me. This was what was in the contract. I can't go there and make them assemble it.
Right. Yeah, it's I think the point about transparency is absolutely right. Like, for me, it was extremely important that people understood what was really happening, because if you don't fill that void, if you just have silence, then people's imaginations start running rampant. And then you get all sorts of other problems that can come out of that, let's say. But for me, one of the challenges with being, I want to be open and honest and transparent and give as much information as we possibly can. But when you're relying on somebody else to hold up their end, and you communicate to your customers that, yes, I will have this for you by XYZ date, and then the person who commit that to you doesn't come through, well, then you look like a liar, right? And you haven't fulfilled your obligations to your customers, and then they get upset. It's a challenging process, and I definitely think that hardware startups, probably one of the tougher gigs out there. I would definitely say it is a crazy thing to be taking on as a venture, and you either hit it big or you bust, and it's a good game to be in. But there's a lot of places that things can go wrong.
Yeah. A question to both of you. I mean, this takes its toll, doesn't it? Because I mean, you're not like traditional CEOs, and you've got a lot of people underneath you who buffer you from the public. When you're reading nasty comments about your employees or about your company or about your product or about you lying to them, how have you taken that? Because you have to have really thick skin to be able to sort of shrug off what people are saying. And some of it gets really mean. Some of it I've seen on both of your sites. I've seen people saying, this is a scam. These people are all thieves. They should all be thrown in jail. They don't know what they're doing. They're incompetent. How do you deal with that? And at the same time, try to still develop the community of people, some of whom now hate you?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. It also sounds like one of the blog posts. I remember comments about this is a Ponzi scheme. This is they are probably somewhere on an island enjoying what we're doing. A lot of people complaining that we're using the money to actually get interest on their payment, while at the same time, I think as a CEO and as a startup, you're trying to make sure that that money isn't spent on anything else than just the hardware that they should be manufacturing. I think humor within Karma is a really big part of dealing with negativity. Across the board, when you get hundreds of negative comments, and even in our customer support team, thousands of emails during the week, we have to keep in mind that people are not angry, but most people are just eager to get the product. I remember talking to my co-founder, Stefan, and thinking about what would have we done if there were only 4 comments and that were all, okay, good luck, guys. I think that would have been worse for everyone at Karma than 1,000 negative comments. Because in the end, I think we all know that people are waiting for that device to hit their doorsteps. And expressing yourself in a form on a blog post is incredibly easy. you can't hide behind 1,000 things. So keeping those things in mind while reading the comments. We only had one rule. If there were people attacking people on our team, we would whitelist or we would blacklist those comments, simply because we didn't want anyone to be personally attacked. Besides me, we took down a few comments, but I think the personal attacks, that is something, unfortunately, that you have to deal with, and keeping in mind the bigger picture that people just really want the product.
Right. Daniel, let me throw basically the same question to you. Stephen was really good about describing what you do keep and what you don't keep. And something else I think we can tease out of his statement was, worse than getting slammed is silence.
Yes.
Because silence means there's no energy, there's no passion, there's no interest in the product whatsoever. It's just, oh, okay, I don't care. But it's hard to take that away as a positive if you're just getting slammed over and over and over again.
Right. I think you're right. The passion for me is the important part. And a lot of times you talk about like a Kickstarter, you talk about an early stage startup where you're doing pre-orders before the product is shipped. People are genuinely passionate and want that product. They actually see the need, and they're part of your early adopters. You're part of your early audience that you definitely want to make happy. And I think the more passionate people are, the more easily they may become disappointed by it. So it is exactly a double-edged sword, right? You want to have people that really love you and support you, and you can build a community around the company and the product and everything. But at the same time, there is a lot of responsibility that comes with that, because if you have a loyal following of several thousand customers that are there and behind you, it can trigger an avalanche very quickly, I think, of negative comments and things. And it's important to, for us at least, it was very, very important to stay on top of the customer service aspect of it and catch those issues as they start flaring up so that they don't get out of control. You really have to be cognizant of what is in the customer's best interest, as well as trying to run a business. But customer service is the biggest part, and if people are unhappy or they don't, whatever it may be, I believe it's really your job to make sure that the customer's happy at the end of the day. So,
let me bring my co-hosts back into the discussion. Chee, as a person who does or has done a lot of work with the government, you understand the whole devil in the details idea of speccing out parts and speccing out a manufacturing process. This is not a new story, right? I mean, this has been happening since time immemorial of manufacturing.
Oh yeah, I've been listening to this. I feel for you guys. I really do. Daniel and I have known each other for a long time, and I really feel for him, and I was one of his biggest supporters. But everybody remembers that $1,000 toilet seat on the B-2 bomber. And the devil is in the details. In this case, the government contract, which literally weighed hundreds of pounds. Actually, the B-2 bomber, I'm pretty sure the documentation was probably closer to a ton. The specs were so tight that no commercial off-the-shelf toilet seat could fit the need, and they had to custom design the tooling to build a toilet seat, and they only needed like maybe, I think, 50 of these. So they had to do a custom manufacturing run of a toilet seat for the B-2 bomber, and that's why the toilet seat cost $1,000. So devil in the details can go both ways. So I totally feel for you guys. The difference is, instead of a blog post, contracting officers sometimes get called in front of the Senate or the House committee on such and such. And trust me, even being the guy sitting behind the main contracting officer, handing them notes in front of Congress is not a fun thing to do.
Both to Stephen and to Daniel, I just thought about this, what Chee was talking about, the whole idea of procuring a custom-made device. Both of you did prototypes, and prototypes are typically easy to do because you have the part, you know what it needs to do, right, and it works well, and you think, okay, well, we'll just send these specs to the manufacturer in this new format, because that's what you do. You have to have style. The Karma Go is incredibly well styled. The finished Shield is incredibly well styled. It's that last step where things get customized and where things no longer look like they did in the prototype stage. that they are most likely to go wrong. Did you find that, Stephen first, did you find that happening with the Karma Go?
Yeah, over and over again. I think one of the I'm looking at the device right now, and one of the features on our device is an LED light guide. 5 simple LEDs that indicate signal strength and battery level. But the brightness of those lights kept changing with every test sample that came in. And really the only way to solve it is to go to our factory, to travel to China and be there and trying to figure out why the inconsistency of the plastic changes over time. In our case, it had to do with the amount of light in the factory, with the environment and circumstances that were sort of impacting the plastic. And for us, not knowing what is going on, but kept seeing these different light guides come in through our FedEx packages. I think the devil is in the details, and when you do that, the only way to solve it is to go over there, sit next to the person that is manufacturing your hardware, and keep doing that over and over again until they get that right in an entire production run. And right now, even with every production run, we have a QC team on site that makes sure that there is this tiny little pouch that we send out, that the colors are perfect, that the colors of the logo match the other devices, that the little red dot on the on and off button is positioned at the center of that button and not a little bit to the left or right. It's not, I think, and especially when you're doing smaller production runs, and we're doing 5,000 to 10,000 pieces every production run, things shift and change, and even like a small millimeter has an impact on your experience. So you keep sort of overseeing the production, and the best way to do it is just to be in the factory. And to us, that was a crucial realization really early on, that if we weren't there, things just weren't perfect.
Yep.
Daniel, they had problems with packaging, and that, again, I hear that a lot. In fact, that happened to Apple. That's exactly the same thing happened to one of their iPhone models. For you, because you also had a custom chip, that ratchets up the level of difficulty even a bit more, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, the custom aspect of it definitely does. I think the size, the form factor, things like that all add and contribute to it. The fact that it was the custom PCB, and it was kind of one of the first generation products to use that PCB, or to use that CPU, that was also part of the challenge, because there weren't really, let's say, well-defined reference designs that you could pull up. And, you know, even in the reference designs that are there, with any new chip, there's always going to be changes and things that are going to be coming out of it. So there's plenty of opportunity for mistakes to be made. And I mean, to Stephen's point, the one thing that I've kind of walked away from with this is, in general, whether it be manufacturing or whether it be hiring employees, whatever it may be, sometimes it's better to maintain that quality control and pay a little bit more. I find that, what is the old saying goes, if you think it's expensive to hire a professional, try hiring an amateur. So, and I think the other piece that I heard was, poor people can't afford to buy cheap stuff.
Right.
So sometimes, the savings look great on paper, but at the end of the day, it winds up costing you a lot more between time, headache, going back and forth, and just managing the project remotely. It adds a lot of challenges, I think. So,
Curtis, I want to bring you in here because, of course, you are an enterprise specialist, and you have your ear to the ground as far as the up-and-comers in the enterprise world. Listening to this discussion of what it takes to have a hardware startup, which we all know it's a lot more difficult than creating an app. I mean, it's harder to revise, it's harder to get out there, and when things go wrong, it tends to cost you a whole lot more than a couple of bad lines of code. But have you seen a trend in startups that become established players in the business, in the enterprise? What are the lessons learned that we take away from this about trying to be a startup in today's far more connected world?
Well, I think one of the chief things that you have to look at is the companies that go into it intending to be successful long-term companies providing enterprise products. There are an awful lot of Silicon Valley startups who go into it thinking that their goal is to have a great prototype and perhaps a really good first product because that's what's going to get them purchased by a larger company. And that often works. But if you want to look at those companies that have succeeded in being long-term independent companies, generally they started out with that as their goal. So I would say that's the number one thing. If you're an enterprise and you're looking at companies like this, you ask the people who started them, what's your end game? Is it going public and having a company that you are a partial owner of this large successful enterprise? Is it one of the things that you really do want to be purchased by someone else? Those are the kinds of things you want to ask. You want to know that they have good manufacturing and operational skills in there, if for nothing else than to ride herd on the contractors who are going to be doing the actual work. But ultimately, you look at expertise, you look at intent, and you look at what they plan to do. That's going to tell you an awful lot, and that's part of the reason why it's important to have these conversations and not just buy off of a commercial or a spec sheet somewhere when you're dealing with a startup or a relatively new company.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. That's right, folks. You have spent another hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 manufacturers. I want to thank our panelists, especially to our two special guests, Daniel, Stephen. It's inspirational. It's nice to bring people in who are actually trying to get in the business, who are actually trying to put out a new product, especially products that are, well, a lot of people are very passionate about. Stephen, can we start with you? We already told people what your product is, but I want to give you as much time as you want to plug and tell people where they can go to get a Karma Go, where they can find out more information about you, about Karma, about what you do, and about what's coming in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to show what we do is to show, let's see if it works, this little guy. Karma is the easiest way to connect all your devices to the internet and stop worrying about internet connectivity. In a nutshell, we want to make sure that wherever you go, anywhere in the US, you have to be able to connect your devices and do whatever you want to do with the internet. We want you to stop hunting down Wi-Fi signals at the coffee shop and at the hotel. We just want you to get online. To get Karma, you go to yourkarma.com, you buy the device for $149, and you simply refuel it with data when you're running low. And that's it.
That's your hotspot, your connection, your internet, your Karma. Stephen, thank you so very much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure. You know, I will find a way to have you back either on this show or one of our other shows because it has been a lot of fun to speak with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Daniel, of course, thanks to you again for coming back on. You were a guest when you were still with Dell, then with SonicWall, then a guest when you were with Dell SonicWall, then a guest when you were with ITUS. So you're an old hand here. Here's your plug time. Tell people where they can find The Guardian, where they can find ITUS Networks, what you're working on, where they can pick one up.
Sure. So if you head over to itus.io, our new website, you can actually order the Shield or our new Wi-Fi Shield product. If you enter promo code TWIET164 at checkout, you'll get free shipping on your order as well.
Hey, all right.
So Shield will provide you with home or small business internet security. Gives you protection for an unlimited number of devices and includes lifetime security updates when you purchase the hardware.
And by the way, it's if you really like to get into the hardware, it's a lot of fun because you can install Linux packages on it and do things like, line level packet sniffing.
We have over 500 people signed up and registered for our user community forums, and we are actively engaging with them every day to, make the product better as we go. So it's great, and absolutely, it's perfect for that type of thing.
Thank you, Daniel. And of course, I'll have you back on whenever I can because it is always a pleasure.
Thank you, Padre. Great to be here.
And of course, thanks to my co-hosts. I wouldn't want to do Twite without them. In fact, I couldn't do Twite without them. They really are the heart, the soul, the brains, the beauty, the brawn. I'll let you two figure out which one is which of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's start with Chee, the man who scraped his knees for you That does not sound right. We're not going with that title. Could you tell folks where they can find you and your work?
Well, I'm hoping to be able to tweet that will be in San Francisco someday relatively soon, and I think we'll have a Quiet Riot meetup at Urban Putt for some adult beverages and mini golf. How's that sound?
I like that. Actually, yes. Let's do. I haven't done mini golf in forever, so definitely. Fantastic.
There you go.
Curtis Franklin, Information Week Radio, is you've got some special events coming up you want to share with the Quiet Riot?
Well, we've got all kinds of interesting stuff going on. We are adding to the shows at Information Week Radio. We're going to be adding an entire series that are in support of the Information Week Conference, which coincides with the first 2 days of Interop 2016. We're going to be moving more solidly into podcasting. We're getting those things going so that people will be able to listen to us on the go as well as live and streaming. And I'm getting ready to head out in mid-November to FaucetCon, the free and open source software convention, which is going to be in Orlando, Florida. So all kinds of cool stuff going on. Hope people will follow me both at Twitter at the handle that's down here and on Periscope, where my handle is exactly the same as it is on Twitter.
Gentlemen, thank you again, and we'll see you soon. Also, thanks to you. That's right, the person who watches Twice, listens to us each and every single week. We wouldn't have a show unless you did exactly that, so we want to make it easy. Just go to our show page at twit.tv/Twiet, Twiet. There you will find all of our episodes, so you can download it in the format of your choice, and you'll also find a drop-down menu so you can subscribe to get our episodes automatically delivered into your device of choice. You want the audio version in your iPhone so you can listen on the way to work. If you want a video version on your tablet so you can watch on your breakdown. If you want the high definition video so you can see me in high def, which I'm not really sure why you'd want to do that. But if you did, you could download it to your Mac, your PC, your laptop, your desktop, and watch on your HD screen at home. Finally, thanks to everyone here who makes this show possible, to Lisa and Leo, who let us do This Week in Enterprise Tech, to our engineers like Alex Grumple, Hal, I forget his name, and also to our TD, Mr. Brian Burnett. Brian, could you tell the folks where they can find you on the Twit TV network?
Well, they can find me doing a show with you on Thursdays called Know How, which was a lot of fun. And considering we had a security-themed episode yesterday, why didn't I get to play with the ITUS shield?
Because I don't like you.
Oh, okay. Well, at least you're clear about that then.
All right. Oh, and yes. And folks, don't forget that you can also jump into our live stream every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time, live.twit.tv. And as long as you're watching live, jump into our chat room at irc.twit.tv, and you'll be able to write me messages as we do the show. It's part of the experiment that is Twit TV. Also, if you really want to, follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. Until next time, I am Father Robert Ballecer, the Digital Jesuit. And remember, if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.